name is Matthew Wayne Selznick, and this is Sonitotum, episode 93. Hello, my friends. On this and every episode of Sonitotum, we talk about making stuff, mostly writing, finding success as we each define it for ourselves, and staying healthy and sane in the process. Often, I invite another author or writer to talk about those three tentpole concepts: making stuff, finding success as they define it, and staying healthy and sane in the process. And that's what this episode is all about. By the way, today is Wednesday, August 23rd, 2023. As I record this, I am speaking to you from the lush and lavish studios of MWS Media in Huntington Beach, California. The conversation with today's guest was recorded back in May of 2023. And like all conversations with all of my guests on Sonitotum, it's intended to be kind of an evergreen experience. You'll be learning about their process, their experiences, their whole thing. And in that, I believe you'll find some things that you can take into your own creative writing life. By the way, you might wonder, if you're first joining us, who am I to be talking to you about such things, making stuff, finding success, staying healthy and sane? Well, I have been an independent creator since, well before the turn of the century. I was one of the very first podcasters, starting in the fall of 2004. My first novel was the first novel in history with a simultaneous initial release in paperback and several different ebook formats, because things weren't quite so monolithic back then, and free podcast editions. That was Brave Men Run in 2005. Since then, I've released a little over a dozen works in various genres, fiction and nonfiction, and I make my day job from helping people bring their creative endeavors to fruition, to market, and to an audience. You can find out more about that at mattselznick.com. For those of you who have heard previous interview shows, in the immortal words of Pascal, often misattributed to Mark Twain, I apologize for the longer podcast. I didn't have time to create a shorter one. And that's going to kind of be how it is going forward. I'm not going to be so precious about making every single moment of these conversations some sort of quasi NPR BBC4 quality. Not that they ever actually got anywhere close to that in the first place. But in the past, I've taken, maybe 12 to 15 hours to record, produce, edit, and release these interview episodes. And I think we'll all be happier. Well, I know I'll be happier, and that means I'll be doing more episodes and more willing to do more episodes if I don't kill myself like that to put out one of these puppies every 2 weeks. So yeah, this one clocks in at over an hour and a half. Don't have the exact time for you yet because, hey, I'm still making it right now. But in the interest of brevity, I just wanted to mention that. Stick around after our conversation. I want to talk about some of the wonderful supporters of the show and get your feedback on a few things. And of course, I want to know how you liked today's guest. Who is today's guest? Today's guest is a gentleman I met at the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association Nebula Conference in May of this year. And a couple weeks after the conference, we got together over the old virtual transom and recorded this talk. Darius Jones writes cosmic horror, weird fiction, dark fantasy, or as he likes to call it, transcendental horror, as well as speculative poetry and sometimes historical fiction. His stories and poems have appeared in Strange Horizons, the No Sleep podcast, Starline magazine, and elsewhere. He is a member of the Horror Writers Association, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, and the SFPA, which, you know what, I'm going to have to look that one up. I don't know that acronym, but if you check the show notes for this episode, episode 93, at mattselznick.com/sonitotum-093, then I'll have links to all this stuff. You can also, of course, learn more about Darius Jones by visiting dariusjoneswriter.com. That's DARIUSJONES writer.com. Or you can find Darius on Twitter and Instagram at Darius Jones Writ, DARIUSJONESWRIT. All right, my friends, let's get into this conversation with Darius Jones. Darius Jones, what do you create?
I'm a fiction writer. I write speculative fiction. These days, I'm really focused on poetry, speculative poetry, horror poetry, science fiction poetry. In the past, I write a lot of horror podcasts. I really love that medium. And by that, I mean kind of scripted fiction podcasts for horror. Then I also write a little bit of historical fiction based in medieval Spain that tends to be a little bit longer. So a lot of different things.
There's so many places I could go with that, but I like to ask sort of the 4-year-old question, which is, but why? So you've talked about what you make, but why do you create?
I write because I have to. I discovered that a number of years ago, actually, and I had a stint where I was really serious about it, and then I kind of fell off the horse, and I didn't for a while, and then it kind of came back to me, and I realized to be a happy, whole person, I really have to do this. I think it's Descartes or Pascal, one of the two. I always get them confused. Said that man has a God-shaped void inside himself. Well, I don't know about that, but I know that I have a fiction writing void inside of myself that nothing else can satisfy, and I have to do it, and I feel compelled to do it.
You said you discovered a few years ago that you had to fill that void. What happened to take you away from writing? And tell me a little bit about what that experience was like, because I'm the same way. I kind of warn everyone who gets close to me that if I'm not given the chance to create, and for me, it doesn't even necessarily have to be writing, I turn into kind of a jerk. There's something that gets backed up and and start to get irritable and everything else. So tell me a little bit about that experience. The what you mentioned that years ago you discovered this about yourself. If and again, as in as much detail and as transparent as you want to be.
I had started writing fiction pretty seriously, actually, I would say I would go as far back as my mid-20s, actually. And there were signs now looking back, signs even way, way before that fiction, that horror would play a very important role in my life. That's another story, though. And I had started screwing around in my mid-20s with writing a couple poems, not many, but writing fiction and longer fiction. And then I guess I just sort of, I don't know if I would say freaked out or thought I couldn't do this, or gee, how many people make it doing this? Not many, right? I mean, could I do that? I don't know. And I never really followed it up and gave it the shot that I should have given it at that time. I don't regret that. I think it was an important part of me learning the craft. I think it was an important part of me learning about myself, but I just kind of fell out of it and just walked away from it. And actually, I think I was, for a time, very much at peace with it, and a little bit of contrast to yourself. And I ended up, getting a kind of corporate job and doing that sort of thing. And then slowly, I moved to DC, and slowly I just realized, I need to do this. I started, seeing books and seeing art and things of this nature. And I thought, gosh, I really need to pick this back up again. And I started just writing a book. This is almost 10 years ago now. And I don't think I intended it to be a book. A good idea came into my head, and I started to write, and it expanded and it became a book. And I'm just like, I'm going to do this. I need to do this. And I started in that process, I started feeling better mentally, mental health wise, as soon as I really got into it. And I really came to realize I need to do this. And I finished wrapping it up, and I self-published it. That became the Library of Lost Books, which was my very first book. I posted on Amazon. And then since then, I've just kept it going. So it's a very long tale, but that's kind of a compressed version of it.
So a couple of things piqued my interest there. First of all, the Library of Lost Books seems like the perfect title for the book that brings you back to creating. Yeah. It's like the Library of Lost Books by the author of his lost creative impulse.
Yeah, that's true. I don't really think about it that way, but yeah, that's true. It was all about all these books that actually were completed, but were lost because of invasions or, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's that I think was a motivating factor, thinking about all these great past authors and writers,
And I can't help but come back around to this. You had mentioned, and I'm probably not going to get this exactly right, but there was something earlier in your life that clued you in that horror and fiction would become very important, but you kind of glossed over it and said, "Oh, that's a long story, though. It's another story." But it might be relevant. I mean, it sounds like this impulse was there early on. What was that other story?
I'll tell you how I think the very first sign that I knew this was going to happen was actually in first grade. We had a scholastic book fair, with a big bookseller of, books to kids in the American.
The bookmobile, sure.
The bookmobile. Yeah. And I have a very distinct memory of being a little kid and first grade and just being so excited that it was going to be there. And it was going to be in the library. And I'd been in the library, enjoyed the library. But this time I could actually go in to the book fair, and I could actually bring one of those books home, and then I could keep it forever and read it as much as I want. And that was so exciting to 6-7-year-old me. It was just unbelievable. And I picked out 2 books there. One was kind of a Where's Waldo with pirates, little boy stuff was interesting. And the one really intrigued me actually was like monsters and makeup or something like this. And it was a small little book about the universal monsters, meaning Dracula, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein. And it told you about them, but then it also showed how you could make your own little horror show for your friends by using simple makeup and lighting. And I think it changed my life in the sense of I think everything I had consumed or read until that point was, oh, it's a story. It's that, it's this, it's that. But then when I saw that book, I was like, oh, there are people who create these stories, who make these myths. And with this book, I can go home right now and I can make other stories and scenarios and haunted houses for my friends. And it also had a thing on Lon Chaney in there, on the Phantom of the Opera. And of course, I'd never heard of him. But man, did he look cool as the Phantom, And that just really stuck with me. And that's one of those things where, did I decide, oh, I got to do fiction writing now? I know I was the first grade, but there was something that stuck with me about creating and writing and with this horror tinge. And it's just interesting to me that now I've kind of, all these years later, kind of picked that back up. So that's interesting. And if I could continue the story just a little bit.
Of course.
Lon Chaney came back again, actually, on that second or third time around, that time when I picked up writing again and did that Library of Lost Books. Mm-hmm. I was kind of I'd moved to DC. I was kind of new there. I needed to kind of go into this recovery mode. And they had this silent film festival or, showing every week in Eastern Market, small little hall. You'd go in there with about 50 people. Silent films don't draw big crowds. And they'd have a different silent film. And they would have Lon Chaney every once in a while. I'd never really seen his films, definitely not on the big screen. And to go there and to see it, it was an education. It was like, this guy isn't doing just horror. He's doing high art that happens to be horror. And it's like, wow, that's really interesting. And I think that got me thinking, oh, maybe I could do something like that, not as an actor, but as some kind of creator, a writer. So Lon came back for me actually twice. It's a bizarre story.
That's pretty great. And no, yeah, I'm glad you went into it because I love a good origin story. I was probably first grade, but I remember probably the first story that I wrote. I can still see my hand writing the story, and I also have very fond memories of the Scholastic Book Club and the Bookmobile and all of that. In fact, I had a similar book to the one you describe with, it wasn't just the Universal monsters and it didn't get into the makeup and stuff, but it had all of the movie monsters, so Godzilla, the Creature, King Kong, the Phantom, all that stuff. And yeah, it really sparked something for me. And so from that moment, like, when do you remember, I said I think you did say you started writing kind of in your mid-20s. That's kind of a space between that Universal Monsters book and that moment. Was there any like fucking around writing for you or your friends or anything like that in high school or anything like that?
So what happened in high school, I had a great 8th grade teacher, Mr. Rewald, who sparked my interest in stories very much. He would sit there and he would actually read aloud some of the stories to us, and he really made it come alive. That was interesting to me. Then I had a series of okay English teachers, and in high school I had a teacher named Mr. Thomas who really encouraged me to write not only essays but some fictional stuff. Mm-hmm. And one thing that really made me realize that I needed to do this was when I was actually an undergrad and I had kind of switched to history. I didn't want to do English because I felt they analyzed stories to death and that didn't really excite me. So I did history instead. I think that was a great choice for me. And it's really helped with historical fiction writing. But I remember I went back home at some point. I met someone I'd been on a sports team, volleyball team with. And he said, "Hey, how's it going?" This and that. And, he said and he was still in high school because he was a couple years younger than me. So I think he was a senior. So I must have been a sophomore in college, something like that. And he said, something interesting happened in Mr. Thomas's class the other day. And I thought you should know. I said, well, what's that? And he said, Mr. Thomas was reading. He wanted us to write some of his own stories, our fiction and everything. And so he brought out someone who had really written something well a few years ago, read the story and to the whole class. And everyone was like, "Oh, that's really, really good." And he said, "You know what? This was written by a high school student here at this high school, just like you. And his name was Darius." And I was just like, what? So that was another kind of signal to me, like, hey, you've practiced this, at least, 18-year-old, you're starting to get a little bit more sophisticated, right?
Yeah.
Greater. You're starting to put things together. That was a signal like, hey, maybe you need to take this a little bit more seriously. Maybe you need to do something about this. And, I got my history degree eventually and then kind of thought about things, and I did get a job. I was working and stuff, but then I thought, I also need to write. I also need to write fiction and do something with this. And that's kind of how that phase started.
Wow. Your fame preceded you.
Yeah, in a weird way.
That's pretty great. So we've had the past authors, I say we, it's the royal we, it's just me here. I've had mostly fiction authors on the show so far. One playwright, and mostly genre fiction as well. Yep. No poets yet. In fact, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here, but also no one who's done the scripted podcast, the audio drama kind of stuff either. So I really want to talk about the poetry stuff. First, though, let's dig into a little bit. How did you get involved with scripted podcast with audio drama?
So my very first story that I traditionally published was called The Hatchlings, Those Blessed Little Spiders. It's kind of an allegory meditation on the death penalty, actually, set in the far future, and involves lots of little spiders. So you can imagine how things go. That was first published Fiction Vortex almost 10 years ago, I think maybe 10 years ago. And I just shelved it and didn't think about it. And I was at some writer meeting and they were like, hey, there are podcasts out there who you could resell your story to. And I was like, what? Is that true? And like, I thought, it's previously published. No one will touch this. And they're like, no. They consider it a totally different thing. If you've published it somewhere else, even, they'll like it. I'm like, okay. So I started, it's a horror piece, like sci-fi horror. And I started looking for horror markets, and I found one or two. And then I was like, we'll just see what happens. So I sent it to No Sleep Podcast, which is a great horror podcast. I love it. It's radio drama at its finest. It's all voice actors with lots of music, creepy music and sound effects. It's like Orson Welles, for the modern day.
Sure.
And I'll just send the Hatchlings to them and see what happens. I don't know. It's first person was the only thing that they really required. It's got to be horror. It's got to be first person. I said, it's both. Let's send it and see what happens. Forgot about it. Completely forgot about it. And then I'd say about 3 months later, they're like, hey, we want to produce your story. I was like, what? here's the contract. I'm like, well, okay, sure. And they had, there was also going to pay me for it. So I'm like, heck yeah, let's do this. And ever since then, I've thought, what's a good idea, Darius? If you're writing horror, why don't you write it with the thought that you could sell it twice. You could sell it once to a magazine, and you could sell it a second time to an audio podcast market. Yeah. And so I've done that. I've also had success with Alice in Wonderland piece called Go Ask Alice that was picked up somewhere else. I can't really reveal the details yet, but hopefully those will come. And then I've just kind of kept on that tack ever since, because I love writing first person horror and other types of horror. And I love doing podcasts. I think I love that medium. I just think it's such an interesting thing to have this kind of medium that was the top medium in the world 90 years ago, 30s and the 40s, that's come back. It's astounding.
That's pretty cool. Before we started officially rolling, I was talking to you about how I started podcasting pretty early, and around 2005 or so, the podcast fiction market started to be born. And it was all a pretty small cadre of people doing this kind of thing. But naturally the writers who were also podcasters or who were podcast adjacent, and vice versa, we all knew each other. And so, I've done a lot of, not a lot, but a dozen or so things for the Escape Pod family of podcasts, the Podcastle and Pseudopod and Escape Pod itself. And
those are great too.
Yeah. And it's so much fun. And then there was a great, more of a semi-dramatic, semi-dramatized podcast called Variant Frequencies. And they've been gone for probably 10 or 15 years now. The archive is still up, but and did a couple of things for them where, I actually got to ham it up a little bit, and not just narrate, but actually play a role. And it's great fun. Yeah, it's great fun. And it's exciting to see. I think if you hang around in like the podcasting groups and forums and stuff, it's real easy to think that podcasting is kind of monolithic. Like, how do I get enough listeners to get advertisers? And, who out there is a successful entrepreneur who would like to talk about, it's like, you know what? That's not all there is to podcasting. Yeah. And these little niches and podcast fiction is going strong, and it's you're absolutely right. It's a great secondary market, and why not just have that in the back of your mind when you're writing something, that you can sell elsewhere.
And it's really changed, I think, at least my horror writing. It's become so much more, oral is the word.
Right.
I think about, how if characters are going somewhere, I think, how would this sound? It really, really made me focus on this mysterious, ineffable thing called voice in writing, and how someone sounds when they tell a story, or how someone sounds when they're talking. And it really helps, people have said this all, a lot, and it's trite almost, but to read aloud, or at least whisper aloud, is what I do, your pieces once you're finished, because you'll find yourself going, no, that's not how people talk, or that's not what they would say, or even the flow of that sentence doesn't quite work, even if it's not dialogue. Let me change it so it's just more pleasing to the ear. You're just always thinking, like, what's pleasing to the ear? Because that's all you have in podcasting is the ear. So it makes you focus on that. And I think even in my prose that's meant to go on a page, it makes that prose better, just having that discipline that I learned from podcasting. So
yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because after all, when we're reading something, we're hearing it in our heads. So it's still that rhythm to the language. And the reading out loud thing. The other thing that I've learned that it helps discover, and maybe this is just one of my little quirks, but the accidental rhyme.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, oh man, that doesn't, and just like you said, and the other thing too, of course, is if you read something and you yourself can't get your mouth to say those words, you keep tripping over it and something, well, it's probably room for improvement there. And it's a great technique. Absolutely.
There's some great outtakes from Orson Welles radio and stuff on YouTube about frozen peas and stuff. And he is sitting there, and he's a writer, director, producer, blah, blah, blah. And he'll sit there, and he's the outtakes, and he'll read it. And he'll go over this ad or something, and he'll be like, no, that's not right. And they'll be like, what, Orson, what are you talking? He's like, that doesn't make sense. Wouldn't you rather say this instead? And then he does it. He just edits what the writers have said, handed him, and just does his own thing. But he does usually sound a little bit better, but it's just, it's hilarious to me. But there's something to that. What he's saying is there is a rhythm, a sound that you need to go for. For sure. More pleasing.
I think of a Philip Roth book that I read that is lesser known, called Deception. Yeah. And the whole thing is dialogue.
Wow.
Without attribution.
Wow.
Without quotation marks.
Oh.
But it's you would think that would be like tiresome, right? And just
yeah.
But this is, and I assume this had to have been the challenge that he was presenting himself, right? Is to not make it tiresome. But the voices of, and usually it's just two characters talking, and it's the same two characters pretty much for the entire book.
Yeah.
But their voices are so distinct. Yeah. And the placement, the rhythm and the timing of the prose, the old trick, longer paragraphs make the reader write slower and shorter paragraphs make the reader write faster. And you can control the mood, even just through that. Masterful. I mean, reading that thing was not only was it just devastating, it was a masterclass,
Yeah, I might have to check that one out. Yeah.
It's made me think of that kind of, well, as you said, the oral aspect of prose, which is a good segue for you to talk a little bit about poetry, which is all about how words are selected and sound and the mood and the tone they create. What brought you into poetry, especially speculative poetry?
Boy. All right. Well, story time again.
Excellent.
This is a bit of a crazy one. So I will say this beyond like what many people do, having some horrible dribble that you wrote when you were 14 or 15 and wanting to be in love or whatever, which I've done and will never see the light of day. And many other people have done. I had no desire, no need, no interest in doing poetry whatsoever. And that has been true, since 15, 14, up until 3 years ago, I'd say, a few years ago. And so what happened 3 years ago? Well, we already know the answer to that. The pandemic happened. And suddenly we were all isolated, told to go home March 13th, 2020, come back, when we don't know. And we were all spending a lot more time at home. And luckily we have a small backyard here in Virginia. And like many people, I started to kind of look up. And I remember like looking up at the night sky and just thinking, it all came from actually watching the bats. Like we have a lot of bats here. So I'd kind of sit in the couch in the backyard and I'd watch the bats come in, and here it happens. I started noticing it happened 20 minutes after sunset. You could set your watch by the bats coming out. It's fascinating. And then pretty soon you'd see the stars at twilight, the bright ones. And I remember sitting there and it was the summer, I think at that point, early summer. And there was this bright star always in, I guess, the east. Yeah, the east. And I said, you know what? I wonder what that is. I wonder if I could figure out what that is. And now there are apps and this and that. So I got an app and I was able to point it there and go like, oh, that must be Vega. So Vega was the first star where I knew which star it was, where it was in the sky. And first thing I think I saw in the sky, I knew what it was, and then started figuring out the planets and just doing, I just had binoculars for viewing birds, Mm-hmm. And so I used that. And even with that, I was amazed at the things I could see, and the stars I could see from a pretty light polluted suburban area.
Right.
And so I started doing that, and I got bigger binoculars. You're going to see where this is going, astronomical binoculars. And there you could actually see. Then I started getting to things like the Messier catalog, which are, star clusters and things. And you could actually see a few of those with just a good pair of binoculars, like astronomical binoculars. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And got graduated eventually to a telescope and just going out there, just having some quiet time and seeing these things. And I had never paid attention to astronomy in my life, really, to do it, amateur astronomy. And it was a pretty kind of moving experience, I think, especially because you're surrounded by the pandemic and all this crazy stuff. And I just kind of felt moved by it. And ideas kind of came to mind, as they do as a writer, short ideas, snippets. And I wrote those down, started to write them down. And I was like, what am I doing? What is this? And I was writing about stars and nebula a little bit. And I'm like, well, you feel it, you're a writer, just, get it down. So I did this trick I actually picked up in all those years and working in advertising. I don't work in advertising anymore, but I was a copywriter for some time from advertising. And you'd sometimes get a headline assignment, right? At first, I didn't know how to do that. And what I learned is if you want to write a good headline, You have to understand the concept, the audience, and then you just go write headlines, like write, 15 on a page, 30 on a page, boom, 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 boom. Just keep going, 2, 3, 4 pages, right? And eventually you'll get in this rhythm, this flow, and you'll start getting these good headlines. Put it away for a little while, go back to it. You'll pick out 2 or 3 awesome headlines. And so that's what I started doing with these little snippets of star stuff, basically. And then I thought to myself, it's funny. A lot of these are 2 or 3 lines. That's really funny. That's really funny, Darius. Why is that funny? I'm like, because haiku is 3 lines. And I'm like, yeah, haiku is 3 lines. And I was like, I wonder if I could organize all of these in 3 lines and just keep going. So there we go. Start banging out 3-line things, right? And I'm like, that's 5 syllables the first line, 7 syllables the second, 5 syllables the last line.
Right.
I'm going to mold these into haiku. I'm just going to do it. And I did it, and I sent it off to 3 good friends, only one of whom was a poet. And I was like, what do you guys think of this? Is this garbage? Can you pick the top 10, actually, is what I said to them. And they said, yeah. And they almost all picked the same top 10. And a few others. And so I got it back. I'm telling you the story of my first poem, by the way, and how this all happened. And I got it back, and I was like, okay, I'm going to rank these, cut the other ones. So I ended up cutting almost all of them. I'd say I kept about a third or a quarter of them. The other ones went in the trash. And I was like, these need a little more polishing. So I polished them a little more. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is like a story. It's got a beginning, a middle, it's got an end. This is like narrative poetry. I didn't say at that point, but someone said, oh, it's like epic poetry, which would have freaked me out at that point. I probably would have. So, like the Homer stuff. No. So I'm like, yeah, this is narrative poetry. I'm going to put these in order. So I put 24 haiku in order, polished them off some more. And I'm like, I think I'm going to submit this now. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm like, what's a good speculative fiction, speculative poetry market? I'm like, I did some research. I'm like, Strange Horizons. I emailed the 3 gentlemen who helped me edit it. And I said, it's done now. It's off on submission. Who knows what's going to happen? And then it was like 30 days later, I don't know, maybe less. They're like, hey, hey, Darius, we want to publish your poem. And I was like, what is this? What are these pranksters? Who got their hold of my email? Who is this person? And I went and I looked, and I was like, oh, wow, that person really is the poetry editor at Strange Horizons. Maybe this email is legitimate. And I was like, holy cow. I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah, I accept it. I would love to see this published by you guys. And then I emailed my friends and I said, this is not how this normally goes, but I think I just got my poem accepted by Strange Horizons. And that poem was The King Becomes a Star. And it's done a lot for me. And it's, I think, a beautiful piece. It's 24 linked haiku that tells a story of an Egyptian pharaoh who hires the right guys, the right scribes. And the conceit of it is that these priests can actually do it. They can actually bring the pharaoh back to life, and his journey through the night sky and the cosmos, and that's what it's about.
So that's a pretty good track record, Darius. First time you try to sell a story to a podcast, bang, they buy it. First poem you create, or poems you create kind of on a whim, is sold. And I'm going to take that as good a segue as we're going to get to kind of talking about the other tentpole of the show, which is finding success, and more importantly, how you, for yourself, define success as a creator. What does it mean to you?
Well, before we leave that, then I started getting a lot more rejections in poetry.
Well,
and
of course.
I've collected a lot, but I've also had some acceptances. Just so you know, I've become immortal again. So yes,
you've come back down to earth. Yes,
down to earth, which is good. It's good. Humility is good. So the question of again was, why do I do it, or what?
Well, how do you define, as an artist, as a writer, as a creator, how do you define success for yourself, and how's it going?
Well, I just, came back from the SFWA conference. I forget who it was exactly, but one of the writers there on the panel said, I define success by doing really well with my stuff, making sure it's at a great point, and then sharing it with a community. And I thought, yeah, that's really cool. That's a really pure, good view of what you want to do. I think we do all want kind of these earthly rewards, or these, whether it's money or recognition from peers and everything like that. But it's always been very important to me to have a vision and to create what I want to create, make what I want to make that I think is really good, and make sure I polish it and it's the best that I could do, and then let the cards fall as they may. I don't get too hung up on, reviews or awards or this or that. I just want to stick to my vision and what's true to me. And I think if you do that, I think all that other stuff will come to some degree. I think if you write to an audience, or to what you think an audience will like, you're not just gonna make your best stuff. So I think success to me is staying true to my vision, and maybe finding a small group of people that I can share it with, and that really say, hey, that was great. I've had just a few comments so far. I'm fairly new, but people have said great things about some of my stories and poems, and it really charges me up. I think that's probably the single most satisfying thing, is to have someone who read your stuff go, hey, that really moved me, or it changed how I think about things. It's great,
The idea of, writing for yourself, holding to your vision, which I completely agree with and share that ideal. That can also, though, create, we won't call it a problem, but it create a challenge in figuring out, not, depending on your approach, figuring out where your stuff fits, and or also finding the readership, finding the community of readers for whom that's what they want. It's the joke that I make, which is I make things for people who like the kinds of things I make. Yeah. But the other side of that coin, though, of course, is, and by the way, where are they?
Yeah. Right.
So tell me, talk a little bit about that. How have you, in as much as you have, or if you have, how are you finding your readers for things that are maybe, the genre is Darius Jones. It's not necessarily easily put in a box or an Amazon category.
Yeah, it is tough, because I started writing this stuff that I felt very strongly about, and I realized, this is not sci-fi. It has elements of it, right? But it's usually my stuff is set in the present day in our world. So that's not what sci-fi readers normally go in for. It's not really what fantasy readers go in for. Horror maybe a little bit, but my stuff doesn't normally go exactly in a horror direction necessarily either. So that has been a bit of a challenge, is finding the niche where I really belong with this stuff. It's not something that's easily like, oh, you're this, or, I really struggled with that. I kind of call my stuff cosmic horror. Sometimes I call it transcendental horror, because I think it plays on horror tropes, expectations, but kind of leads people in a little bit of a different place. And I think I really believe in this, if you build it, they will come kind of mentality. I think if you create something that's quality, that's different, I think people will start getting it, start being drawn to it, and start doing it. I think, honestly, and I know this is a really honest podcast here, I think a lot about trap music, actually, the Southern trap music. Mm-hmm. And I remember just driving through, several years ago. I love music, all kinds of music, rock, hip hop, whatever, metal. And I remember, I think it was actually driving through the Great Dismal Swamp in Virginia, which is so cool. It was at night. And I remember just listening to some radio stations, and I was just like, what is this stuff? Like, I've never heard anything quite like this. It's like hip hop, but it's not quite. It's a lot more heavy and gloomier, and it's just the way they are constructing these songs is weird. Yeah. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all, actually, at first. And then I heard on that car ride, I heard some more and heard some more and more down there. And then I was like, oh, there is some good stuff here that they're doing, but it's totally different and fresh. And I dig it, I think it's just I want something fresh, something different, something new. And now that's almost become like the top thing now, almost, at least in the world of hip hop and other things like that. Yeah. In that, it's almost become this dominant thing. And I've read some interviews where, they would say when I first came out with this, nobody wanted to listen to it. Nobody cared. They thought it was weird, crazy music. And now it's the mainstream. And that was really fascinating to me, like how you create something so new, so different. And at first it just doesn't hit the ear right. It doesn't work. And I think in literature and fiction, that can be the same thing. I'm hoping, of course, I might be totally wrong here, that you can create something new, different. And at first people are like, I don't know, this isn't, Darius, this isn't sci-fi really. It's not The Expanse, Mm-hmm. It's not really horror either, it's not The Shining or whatever, it doesn't work. But like, I'm hoping that if I just kind of stay true to this vision, do something that's really kind of quite different, that satisfies me, that eventually, day by day, I'll find some new fans and grow this base, and they'll get it too, And so we'll see, We'll see.
And what do you do to grow your base?
I am starting to realize I need to kind of pick up that game a lot. I do have blog. I am on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me at Darius Jones Writ, WRIT. So I'm there. And that's what I do now. I'm going to be starting a newsletter shortly, and hopefully making more appearances and that sort of thing. That's something that I've really realized this year, that it's part of the game and part of something that I really could stand to improve, along with, writing, editing, submitting. That's kind of been my bread and butter. And now I'm really like, okay, I need to do a bit more on social media, newsletter, and finding these people and growing my fan base. So that's kind of Darius 2023 project here.
Yeah, the social media piece, that's tricky. And I see so many writers, and I'm guilty of this myself, who they're not marketing to readers. They're spending all their time talking to other writers, and talking about, swapping. Yeah. Look, I came out with this, and you came out with that, and I'm also someone who, I can slap genre labels on these things that I write, but they're not necessarily in these neat little boxes. Just finding the right people, the right communities to be in, to find the readers is tricky, but and the other thing about social media, and this may be preaching to the converted for you, but I'll say it for the benefit of the listeners, is that there has to be you have to close the circle. Getting a like on Facebook or Twitter or whatever is a nice little ego boost, but it doesn't sell you any books. It doesn't, you don't know really who that person is, and you don't really have any permission to, say, oh, hey, by the way, 6 months ago, you liked that post. Well, I've got a thing that I wrote, and know that they've heard it, that they've received it. unless they're on a mailing list, and so, yeah, that's all that infrastructure stuff, but also, just figuring out, and I say this not, I say this is sort of partially a question, partially just, bemoaning the challenge is the challenge of being tactical about how you promote, how you put out your, so many people hate this phrase, but how you present your personal brand, and where, and, you talk about your writing, and I think of, we used to call that in the late 70s and the 80s, we called that slipstream or weird fiction.
Yeah. Right.
And I don't even know if editors today would be like, oh, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. Or they would want me to say something like, oh, no, it's, God, what did I hear the other day? And without getting too much into the whining about this stuff, but somebody was talking about fantasy genres, and apparently there's one of them is like neutral light, bright light, and dark light. Like, neutral light is just light. What the hell is this? What are these ridiculous sub categories? Yes. And what does it even mean?
Yeah, it's tough, and I can't say that I've really yet really started to figure out even how to reach these readers that I need to reach, whether it's on Goodreads or any of the other communities, websites. I have not done the Patreon thing. I'm just really beginning to get a handle on, that fourth job of marketing and doing it effectively. Like you said, not just getting likes or getting noticed on social media, but actually then taking that another step and converting that into sales, into people reading and talking about your books and sharing it with others. It's tough. Yeah.
I was thinking you had said something a few minutes ago. Oh, well, okay. So yeah, on that front, this is why we have editing after the fact. So as I understand it, obviously you've sold some things. Your longer works are self-published, or sort of a hybrid, a little bit of both? What's the bulk of your work or your strategy there? And I ask this because it can be easier, of course, if you can't find the editor who understands what the hell you're doing, of course you can just self-publish. What's been your approach there?
So when I started getting back into this around 2011, 12, I was just going to do self-publishing, mostly on Amazon. I still have some works up there. And so that was a mixture of, I would say, novellas and short stories. Mm-hmm. I put it there. And then I was like, you know what? I want to do the traditional route. I'm not really getting traction or what I'm hoping to see from this. I'm going to go do more sell stories and that sort of thing. So I shifted purely to that. I don't really do self-publishing beyond, once something is kind of the rights revert back to me, and then I'll put something out there, self-publish. And so that's kind of how I do that part of it. But now I'm hopefully branching out. We'll see what the coming months, years bring, and hoping to kind of write short stories, write novellas, even some longer pieces that I'm hoping to get traditionally published, and kind of hopefully theoretically offload that a little bit to a small press, maybe a bigger press if I'm lucky. Who knows? I'm still kind of learning that game, and then I can focus on the promotion and this and that. And they can handle kind of the details of the book covers and distribution and all those kind of headaches that I used to have to deal with. Can be somebody else's problem, at least a little bit, a little bit. I know I'll still be drawn into that stuff. But that's kind of my strategy now. And we'll see. We'll see. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You called it what did you say? The fourth job. I think of it as the third shift. Like, okay,
Yeah.
got your client work,
Yeah.
your life, and then and it's the self-publishing thing. I mean, you're absolutely right. If you can get some of that offloaded, if a small press or even a hybrid press or one of the big guys can take it on, and then you can just show up. more or less. Yeah,
more or less. You got to show up a lot. But I mean, I sometimes talk to these indie authors and writers, and they're just going after it and doing this and slinging books and doing the covers and doing the edit. It's amazing. It's so much work. I really admire them for that. And, I was doing that for, I would say, I don't know, a few years. That was kind of my strategy, and it's a lot.
It is a lot. Yeah. As that's been most of my quote career unquote. And it absolutely is a lot. But there's no right way, right? And it's so nice. And again, I say this for the listeners. It's so nice that, you and I saw this 2 weeks ago at the Nebula conference. There's almost no real. There used to be a little bit of you're self-published, but I didn't see that or pick up on that going either direction.
And that whole thing is ridiculous.
And it's nice that it's I think it's finally everybody's kind of figured out that it's the readers don't care.
They don't. I've gone through. I've met some writers my age, older, whatever, who have actually done time on both of those. They started off as I met a guy a few months ago. He started off as indie. He was traditionally published, had an agent, did that whole big, like with big publishers and yada, 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 all that stuff. And then, you know what? He's like, you know what? I'm sick of this. I'm done. And he went back to being indie. So I hope that we get to this point with this where we just kind of realize there are so many different ways to do this, and that this could just, we'll all go through different phases where we're kind of, sometimes we're indie, sometimes we're traditional, then we go back to indie, or, we do whatever we want. Just get the words to the people.
Yep. Well, just like you said earlier, making sure it's good and sharing it with the community, and holding on to the vision that you have. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the third pillar. We touched on this a little bit about how simply being a writer, simply producing, doing the act of writing is important for your mental health and just for your well-being. Talk a little bit about what you do to kind of stay on track and to stay healthy and sane, as we say in the show, when you are pursuing this writing life. What are some of the things you've learned about yourself that maybe you figured out, okay, well, I need to do this and that in order to be the most productive and, physically, mentally, whatever you want to say about it.
So I'll take that in two parts, kind of like the physical side, physical health, mental health, right?
Yeah.
So physical health first, I think so important. I think, there are a lot of these damaging myths about, writers having to drink or, do drugs or whatever to be productive, or, I don't know, live this kind of dissipated life. And I think that's all baloney, bullshit.
Indeed.
I actually did an experiment once of, I wonder if I did drink a little and I wrote, how would it be? So I got just like a little tipsy and I wrote. And then I looked at it, I think 2 days later, and I was like, this is crap. Never going to do that again. So I think it's important to stay healthy, to kind of keep those things in check a little bit. Definitely any kind of substances, mind your dose or not, don't do them at all. I think it's important to, get your sleep. I think it is important. I try to exercise as through about 3 times a week. Nothing miraculous or amazing. Just do a little aerobic, a little weightlifting, just keep in, better shape, overall. So your heart health is important. Brain health, it all feeds into brain health. It's all connected. It's going to feed into your writing. I've taken up, actually, also during the pandemic, which was popular, I took up some meditation. Mm-hmm. Which is also interesting that I kind of started doing poetry at the same time. So I do kind of a variation of Soto Zen meditation, which is basically called Zazen, just sitting, which is literally just sitting for 10 or 15 minutes. I'm not super disciplined about it, but I do it whenever I kind of want to, and I find it really clears my mind. Sometimes I'll put on some background noise, sometimes I won't if it's quiet. And just having that 10 or 15 minutes alone, sitting there doing nothing, really helps to clear the mind. And that's kind of getting into more mental health. I think mental health is really important. I'm really happy to see the evolution in our country about discussing and sharing mental health problems over the last 10, 20, 30 years. I thought it was amazing that Senator Fetterman was like, well, you know what? I need to get better mentally. I'm going to check myself into a hospital. Mm. And no one was like, well, his career's over. Too bad. They were right. Like, I'm going to do this. This is my health. I'm going to take care of my health, and then I'm going to be back. Yeah. Why not? That makes total sense.
You break a leg, you put a cast on, nobody blinks. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer in giving yourself breaks, or, if you do need it, getting therapy. I think that's super important. I think when you get more granular to what we do and what, I'm trying to do in more traditional publishing, you have to really normalize getting rejected. You're going to get rejected a lot. You're going to get rejected. I keep a running tally, share this sometimes. I think I just passed 250 lifetime rejections. I thought that was a lot. I listened to a panel with I Jang, a great up and coming speculative fiction writer. And I've seen her doing the work like online, sharing submission statistics, what she's doing to like get things out there. And she said that she's had 1,500 lifetime rejections so far. So now I'm like upping my goal to 500, maybe 1,000. And I think, when I got my very first rejection, I actually got it from Lightspeed. I sent it in and I was like, oh, they rejected me. Which of course they did, because I was a newbie writer and they're a tough magazine to get into. And it hurt. And now that seems ridiculous to me, because here 250 rejections later, it's like, I just kind of eat them for breakfast. So you just have to realize it's not about you or your story or whatever. This is what we do. A great blog that helped me with that was Aaron Rudell, I think Rudel, Rejectomancy. He is phenomenal. He just talks about rejection, literary rejection, all the time on his blog. And he helps parse, what's just a flat boilerplate rejection versus a better rejection versus an acceptance. And he would share I think he still does share his rejection statistics. And that blog helped me so much to just realize, oh, this is completely normal. This is what's if you're getting rejected, it's a triumph in a certain sense, because you're still submitting stories, you're still writing stories, you're still putting in the work.
That's right.
Yeah. So you just have to understand that, and you have to reach out to other writers and talk to them about how they handle it and what they do. One trick that I've heard others do, and I do myself, is I deeply research. Well, maybe I don't deeply, but I research the markets. I do, that I apply and send my stories to. And I always have, at least in the back of my mind, sometimes explicitly in a spreadsheet, as soon as that is rejected there, what's the next market, And I keep that together in a kind of a submission grinder. I actually use Duotrope. You have to pay for that, but to me, it's worth it because it has analysis and acceptance rates for different magazines. I can track everything there. And I just always know, like, okay, well, they rejected it. What's the next market, right? And then as soon as I send it to that next market, I know what the third one's going to be, so that when it comes in, I don't dwell on it. I don't think about it too much. I'm like, okay, file it away. Now, what's the next market? Bring up my word processor. Hi, Darius. This is my story. Hope you like it. There it goes.
Yeah. And I think that's really good advice. Just sort of treating it as another step in the process. You think or outline, you write, you revise, you edit, you proofread, you submit, you get rejected. And then you submit again. And it's all part of the writing process. And you're absolutely right. Of course, it's not personal. If it was personal, I mean, who's got time to be personal with thousands of submissions?
Ridiculous.
I really hate this guy, and I hate that guy too, and I hate that guy too.
So, but to just think about the sheer mathematics of this just for a moment, over time, you start doing this, and then I started realizing what my acceptance rate is, and it's like 5%, 4%, somewhere in that range, 4%. So let's say it's 4%. Mm-hmm. So that means out of 100 things I send out, 4 of them will get accepted. So what that means is for every 25 things I send out, one thing's going to get accepted. Mm-hmm. So I'm always like, oh, did I get 25 things rejected yet? No. So then I've got to send out 25 things, and then one of those is going to be an acceptance. So that's kind of how I view it now. And the mathematics always seems to work out. Regression to mean is a real thing.
Yeah. And it puts it in a more it's an optimistic way of looking at it. It's a hopeful way of looking at it. And absolutely.
Yeah. So to my mind, if I haven't got the acceptance yet, I haven't submitted enough yet. So gotta get, I do have days where I just do a rush, of submissions. I'm just like, okay, it's kind of, I'm getting low out there. Like I had 30 pieces. I usually have a lot of pieces out because I write poetry now. Mm-hmm. And like, okay, now it's down to 20 and it's getting down to teens. Okay. Like I need to get some stories out there, get some poems out there, and I'll go and submit a batch, and get it back up again. And that's how I do it. I'm looking at, I had about 100 submissions, a little over 100 submissions last year for the first time ever. And I should have been doing that much earlier. And now I'm on track to exceed that pretty well, actually, this year. And I hope I will. So
that's fantastic. And is there a point, I mean, obviously not with the individual poems, but is there a point with the short stories, the novellas, the longer works where, and this would have to be a case-by-case basis, but do you get to a point on any of these where you're like, okay, well, at least for now, I seem to have exhausted the market on this piece. And what happens then? Do you self-publish? Do you just put it away? Or has that not yet happened?
So lately, my rule of thumb of that is 20 or 25 rejections per piece.
Mm-hmm.
It takes quite a while to do that, especially we have no sim sub markets.
Yeah.
So I rarely do that. One of the stories, I forget which one it was. And I was like at the 24th and I was like, I need to get this. This is not going to work. And
then it sold.
And then I sent it in and it sold on the
25th. Yeah. Your math is sound.
Yes, exactly. And it sensed doom, I think, impending doom. But I mean, if you start, so you're in Duotrope or something, you start off with these really tough markets, the Clark's Worlds, the Lightspeeds, Strange Horizons, whatever they are. And then you go boom, 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 and you keep going, working your way down that list, from markets that accept more and more and more. Your chances are expanding each time. I've had a couple stories that I did give up on because they didn't sell at all. But, there's almost always, if you're willing to take 25 licks before trunking a story, and that's usually what I do. I usually do trunk it. That might be changing as I get a newsletter and want some exclusive content.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah. Uh-huh.
But usually I just go, okay, that didn't work. That was experiment, didn't work. Okay, lesson learned. Maybe that story just didn't hit with people, and it's impossible to tell. I have had stories that I thought, this is genius, this is great, and it's like, who cares? And then I had stuff that I just kind of, just sped off and did it, and people were like, yeah, this is great. On the third or fourth try. So
you can never tell. You can never tell. We are never our own best critics, that's for sure, positively or negatively.
Yeah, but if I do flunk it, I don't let that be, I don't engage in that negative self-talk. I don't say, oh, this is because I'm a bad writer, because of this or that. I mean, one of the very first rules that I came to and I believe in being a writer, and I think this is from a very famous fiction instructor's book. I forget who she was, but it was no critic was her rule. And which means when you're writing, when you're editing, drafting, you're going to have these voices of negativity of, oh, I can't be a writer. Oh God, this is terrible. Who am I kidding? And you just need to like kill those voices. You need to put them down, not listen to it. No critic. So that's my big thing. If I ever felt myself doing that, I'd be like, no critic, no critic, no critic. And now I've trained myself to do that. And the critic, honestly, hardly ever comes in anymore. So that's another mental health kind of tip.
I try to think of it for myself as that it's not up to me. And it's kind of gets back to what I said earlier, is that the audience is the one that's going to decide one way or the other, right. And they can't decide until it's finished, until it's on the market, so that's my responsibility. That's my job, is to actually do the damn thing, make it great, but as great as you can, as great as you think you can, as great as you think you have, but ultimately, right. No critic, because that's not your job. That's the job of the reader with their dollars or their clicks or what have you.
Yeah. Yep. I read this quote. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's supposed to be John Wooden. And it's something like, take care of the basketball, take care of the game, and the scoreboard will take care of itself.
It's stoicism, Yeah,
it's stoicism. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. It's and I love the Stoics too. That's been something I've read a lot about. Epictetus is one of my favorites, and his discourses and his whole maxim of what's in your control, and if it's in your control, then you should worry about it. But if it's not, forget about it. It's so simple. It's difficult. That's correct. It is very difficult. But I do try and kind of think about that when I'm writing. It's like, stay true to the vision, write as best you can. And then whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen. And
sort of kind of in the same ballpark as that, or almost a corollary to that is something that I don't think he came up with it, but he's often quoted as saying it, is, what would this look like if it was easy? As Tim Ferriss sometimes is quoted as saying. And I love that. What would this look like if it was easy? Because it's so easy to get yourself wrapped up. Well, I'm going to speak for myself, but it's so easy to get yourself wrapped up in the minutia of like, well, maybe I should add this or do this. And, whether that's marketing or getting your word out there, or just the story itself, getting wrapped up in the mechanics. Yeah. What would it look like if it was easy? And is this in my control? Which kind of happily brings us to a corny little thing I like to do at the end of the show. And that is, when I'm talking to writers, I like to ask, so if you could take everything that you have kind of accreted into your planet of knowledge and wisdom, such as it is, for as long as it's
moonlit, actually.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yes, you're right.
What if you could take everything that you've kind of learned and absorbed and distill it down to almost a bumper sticker that you yourself kind of keep coming back to. And we may have already said this, we may have already covered it, but the thing that you yourself kind of keep coming back to, the core principle, the core ethic, the core lesson that might be of use to others, but is most importantly of use to you, what would that be?
I know you asked this question and I prepared for it. No. No. I think it's putting the work. It's not listening to those negative voices, and that's it. I in my very early days of writing my blog and trying to promote things, I very foolishly kind of did these rules for writing. The very first one was, get black on white, which is to just keep getting the black ink on the white page to keep writing. And the story I had heard with that was that this came from Guy de Maupassant. I'm probably not saying his name correct. I don't know my French, but it was a great short story writer. Mm-hmm. And he basically said, he had a acolyte or someone who traveled all from the south of France for across the oceans to go to Paris to learn from him. And, he basically said, come back. I'm not going to tell you now, but come back in a week or two and I'll tell you. But you're not going to like it. You're not going to like it. And, and so he goes away and he approaches him a couple of weeks later and he's like, okay, I'm here. Like what, I want to be like you. I'm an aspiring writer and I want to be great like you. And he said, okay, I'm ready to tell you. He's like, okay, what's the secret to writing? He said, get black on white. Just sit your butt down in the chair day after day, put in the work, write, edit, submit it in this case. And in the modern world, do social media and do promotion and just keep practicing your craft and get better and better at it every day. And I think the very beginning that rang true, and it still rings true today, is you just got to sit there and consistently do the work day after day. So that's it, I guess, if I could distill things. And, let the rejection roll off your back. You're going to get a lot of rejection in this business. And that's just the nature of it. Just keep perfecting your craft, keep working on writing, editing, submitting. Right now, I'm doing a lot of editing. I hated editing, but I'm learning by doing. And it's really helped to up my game in editing and overall my pieces I'm writing. So there's always a chance to learn, to get better. And you do that by just putting the work day after day.
Do the work.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe that's the bumper sticker. I don't know.
I think that's always good advice. And even though it's an oldie but a goodie, I had not heard the black on white thing. That was almost like a Zen tale. Come to the mountain and sit in front of me and I'm not going to speak. And you're going to, I think of these, these Zen masters and the pilgrims that come to them and they're frustrated and they don't hear what they want to hear. And then they realize they aren't exactly what they need to hear.
And I don't think the young writer would have liked that answer because it's so dumb in a certain sense. It's so obvious. Like, yeah, but it's also true.
And it's the most difficult thing. Yeah. Because all those other things, all that self-doubt, all that negativity that can creep in, that's all going to push against you. It's everything is easier than writing when it's time to write.
Yes. That's very true.
But if you haven't done it if you don't do it. So you might as well at least have something to be upset about.
Right. Exactly.
Well, Darius Jones, this has been wonderful. It's been a great chat. Was there anything that we maybe touched upon or didn't touch upon that you wanted to add or circle back on before we sign off?
It's so funny. I had brought in this book and I wanted to talk about this and we didn't get into it, but something that I think it really helps me with my writing, especially poetic writing, is this concept of flow. This kind of optimal experience. And they talk about rock climbers who do this, or, you think about Michael Jordan being in the zone, or when the writing's really good, let's say, where you're writing really good, you're not really using your conscious mind anymore. You're kind of in this flow state or whatever.
Right. Time stops and the flow of the actual flow of time fades away and everything is, you're in the moment completely. Yes.
Yeah. And so there's a whole book about this. He passed away fairly recently. It's called Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience. I'm going to butcher his name. He was a Hungarian professor, but his name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. But the book is Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience. And he talks about there how you get into this flow state of creativity or high achievement in sports, these sorts of things. And basically, don't want to give the whole plot away, but it's balancing challenges in your skill level.
Yes.
So, Yeah, you don't want to have a challenge that is so huge. There's no way you could possibly, you don't want to jump in the deep end and drown, right? But then you don't want to be in the kiddie pool where everything is just so easy and you're just getting it. You want to be somewhere in between those two extremes where you're still getting challenged, but you have the skills to overcome it, because that is most likely where you're going to get into that flow state and you're going to produce artistically, otherwise, at your best. So that's just kind of a reminder. Just think about that and think about, don't bite off too much more than you can chew. But at the same time, don't do the safe thing. I'm really trying this year. My one resolution this year has been, be bolder, Darius, be bolder. Not super bolder, but take a step or two, be bolder, do those things that scare you a little. And I have been. I'm very proud to say this year I've been doing those things that scare me a little. And it's really paying off. So anyway, that's what I encourage you guys to do. Check out that book. It's a great book. Get in that flow state. Do those things that scare you a little bit this year and see what happens.
I'm glad that you mentioned the idea of personal challenge, artistic challenge, creative challenge when it comes to writing. I'm not going to generalize, but I do see a lot of authors, some of them quite successful, who are quite comfortable.
Yeah.
And because it's working for them, and there's no one motivation or one reason or one thing that's better than another when it comes to creating. It's all valid, but yeah, I'm going to, flip that right around and and sound like a hypocrite. However, at least be conscious that, I think it's important that one be conscious that they are making that choice. Yeah. That it's like, okay, I think of Jack Nicholson's character in As Good as It Gets. He knows he's writing these formulaic things, and that character is not necessarily happy about it, but he's aware of it. And that's fine. If you're aware that you're writing exactly what you know is going to sell you 1 million copies and you move on to the next one, fine. But I think sometimes writers, even before they become authors, they may become frustrated, and it's because they might not be challenging themselves. It's like, putting yourself just a little on edge, creatively, artistically, socially. I mean, I spent 2,500 words writing basically about how going to that Nebula conference was a big dare for me, and so you're absolutely right. And that flow state, not only, and it's to do with practice too. The old Malcolm Gladwell is always attributed to the 10,000 hours thing. Well, it's not just 10,000 hours of doing, it's 10,000 hours of directed, intense pushing. Not just repetition. But challenge. So excellent point. And it's something that covers everything that we've been talking about. It's why and how we make stuff. It's going to push you closer to that definition of success. And it absolutely, you might sweat through it, but it's going to make you happier in the long run.
We were evolved to have a little bit of stress on us,
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Have to run around the savannah and stuff, and I think if it's the right amount, it can really push you to become a better version of yourself, whether it's in your life or any kind of artistic endeavor. So it's always important to challenge yourself.
And one thing feeds into the other. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Darius. This has been wonderful. I hope you've had a good time, and I'm pretty sure that the listeners will find some value in our conversation today. So thanks again.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Well, there you have it, folks. There's the conversation with the transcendental horror author and poet Darius Jones. Please do check out his stuff at dariusjoneswriter.com. And I will have links to his website and as many of the other things that I can find for and about Darius, like some of those magazines that he has been published in and some of his self-published longer works over there at mattselznick.com/sonitotum-093. That's mattselznick.com/sonitotum-093. Sonitotum episode 93. You can find the show notes there. You can also leave a comment there if you have anything you'd like to say about this episode, or if you have any questions or follow-up that you would like to direct to Darius. I'll make sure he sees those comments and replies and responds. You can also, of course, always send me an email at matt@mattselznick.com. If you like, you can record a short voice message, maybe on your phone, and email that to me at matt@mattselznick.com. I respond to everything. Might take me a little time, but I respond to everything. And if you leave me a voicemail, I will respond to that in the actual show. So we'll have a little time-shifted conversation there, as regular listeners know I like to say. Speaking of regular listeners, I have a patron community that I call my multiversalists. These are folks who pledge $5 or more per month, and they get various perks and various access. And most importantly, and the thing that I'm most grateful about, of course, is that they're helping offset the many costs, fiscal, emotional, chronological, temporal, let's say that, associated with producing Sonitotum for all of you. I would like to thank Chuck Anderson, Amelia Bowen, J.C. Hutchins, Ted Leonhardt, Jim Lewinson, and Pearl Zare. Each one of those folks went to mattselznick.com/b-a-patron, and they signed on for $5 a month or more. And you can join them at mattselznick.com/b-a-patron. And by the way, there is a 7-day introductory free trial. So you can get your feet wet, listen to some of the old uncut, unedited podcasts, because every one of these that I do, my patrons get the complete, uncut, unedited version, which usually includes, especially with these interview episodes, lots of stuff that didn't make it in the final cut. And pretty much anything that I create and release in digital format, ebooks, audiobooks, printable PDFs, things like that, patrons get those too for no extra charge. So consider becoming a multiversalist patron to support the show, support creative endeavors, and help grow this community. mattselznick.com/b-a-patron. All right, my friends, in the interest of respecting your time and in the interest of, staying sane myself, I'm going to say to you, my name is Matthew Wayne Selznick. Take care.